For our COBT listeners and viewers, it's Maynard, Mike, and Todd here with something that we're super excited about and been trying to get scheduled for a while. It's an old friend, an old dear friend. Bill Von Gonten is with us. If you are newer to the shale world, you might not know Bill, but if you've ever been around shale in any context, you know the name Bill Von Gonten. Bill is a longtime oil and gas expert. And in the early days of the shale revolution, Bill really pioneered the analysis, the examination, the study, the complexity of the shales. And we were talking about it a little bit, Bill, but you know, from early work in the Haynesville to the Eagle Ford to the Permian to really all the shales, Bill was a leader and a thought leader in particular. More recently, we've been talking to Bill about the Vaca Muerta, but what you'll learn about Bill is he's been looking at the Vaca Muerta for a long, long time, since we all first heard about it. He's doing some other things in other places, but I'm talking way too much. It's just a long way of saying what an honor, great guy, great leader, great friend. Bill, it's awesome to have you.
Thank you, Mayor.
We're pumped.
All right.
All right, we're going to talk Vaca Muerta in a minute. Mike, what would you tell Todd and me and Bill about what's going on in the world?
Well, I don't know if I can tell you guys much, but we'll offer something up for our...
Yes, you can.
Yeah, what I'd say is that if you think about markets over the last, say, 3, 4, 5 weeks, you know, up until last week, it was pretty much volatility was the word, right? And in the last week, markets have really calmed down. And you had on Friday, Chairman Powell at this Jackson Hole meeting pretty much told you that he thinks that inflation is on its way to 2%. Policy is going to change. And so it's almost 100% certainty that they are going to cut September 17th to 18th at their FOMC meeting. So the only question that remains right now for you know, broader equity markets, just for bond markets, is how much are they going to cut? Are they going to cut 25 basis points or 50 basis points? I think most people think it's going to be below 50 basis points. So the interest rate situation has kind of been dealt with. Now, the interesting thing that's coming up on the equity side of the ledger is that NVIDIA is reporting earnings after the close tomorrow, Wednesday after the close tomorrow. Some compare that to, Powell's proclamation that interest rates are essentially, where they need to be. They're thinking this NVIDIA's earnings on Wednesday after the close is going to be as big as event as that. It's hard to believe right now that that's going to be the case, but the market is squarely focused on that. And it's kind of back to what I just said a little while ago. While markets have been calm, I think everything's leading up to this point in time. Now, if you think about NVIDIA over the last, say, 12, 13, 14 quarters, they always beat and raise. And so expectations is that's going to happen again. If that does not happen, you're going to have that stock's going to get beaten around pretty good. AI and tech stocks are probably going to pull back. Remember we started talking about 3 or 4 weeks ago about the Russell 2000 taking some leadership away. If NVIDIA does disappoint, you're going to see that happen again. In some other sectors, it might even be energy, may be able to take a leadership role again, or at least some monies will be going there. So it's something to think about. As far as energy equities this week, one of the things I found interesting was Exxon. Exxon put out their global outlook to 2050. And the reason I thought that was pretty interesting is because we've seen the IEA, we've seen a lot of OPEC, all these guys put out the reports what things look like out to 2050. But what I liked about ExxonMobil is they said that there's 5 or 6 key takeaways. One of the key takeaways was oil and gas is going to make up 50% of the energy mix by 2050. That doesn't sound very heroic at all. But they also said the plateau in oil demand is going to be beyond 2030, and that the oil demand in 2050 will be at least 100 million barrels a day. And the reason I think that's interesting is because a lot of equity people still think that there's no value in tail end reserves. And I would say from that statement, if demand is going to be here for decades, there is plenty of value in tail reserves. So, I think that was a really interesting report, and you should look at it. The last thing we really want to talk about leading into Bill's stuff is just what's gone on in Argentina from a currency standpoint, debt standpoint, equity market standpoint. Obviously you saw after Milei got elected in November 23, debt markets really kind of went up for a couple weeks. They went from 30 cents on the dollar to maybe 50 cents. They're back to 30 cents. It's junk, right? And they're still not out of the hole yet. And so But if you look at what the equity markets did over that time frame, the Mervel is up around 80% since then, and YPF, and I'll probably talk a little bit about that today, is up over 100%. And the last thing I'd say, as we talked to Bill is, I had to go back and say, when did the shale get basically, when did they find out about it? When was the first announcement? And I believe it was in sort of November, December of 2010 is when YPF came out and said that they made a gas discovery there. And I think they were talking about 4.5 TCF or something like that. Anyways, I kind of compare that and maybe where the Eagle Ford is today, because some thought it was going to be as big as the Eagle Ford. And if you look at the production right now for shale, if you look at oil shale, it's around probably 350,000, maybe 400,000 barrels a day. They think it's going to go to 700,000 barrels a day by 2028. And Rystad is thinking that shale production could be 1 million barrels a day by 2030. So I'm really interested to talk to Bill about what he thinks about that. And the reason I think that's important is because unless they really are able to export oil and gas, they're really not going to be able to get their footing on a financial aspect. And so to me, this is really, really important for them to basically get this going. And so we really love to talk to Bill about what he thinks about that. So I'll hand it back to you.
Well, you're about to talk to an Italian chef about pasta, so I think we got something good coming. Todd, what would you throw in?
Well, I'm not going to be in Argentina yet. Let's talk about Michigan first. In almost every discussion I've had today, there have been comments made about an article in the Wall Street Journal this morning about the restart of a decommissioned nuclear power plant in Michigan, the Palisades plant. It's an 800 megawatt plant. This is notable because no nuclear plant that's been decommissioned has ever been restarted. And that's not just in the United States, that's in the whole world. And it goes to show you just how strong the appetite is for this kind of clean, dispatchable resource. Japan turned down a bunch of plants after Fukushima, but they weren't actually mothballed the way this one was. It started decommissioning in 2022 and should be turned back on by 2025. So that's something that's really interesting to watch. The other notable thing about that is between the state of Michigan and the federal government, they're offering about $1.8 billion of support for this restart process. The plant's 800 megawatts, so you're well north of $2,000 a kW installed for this capacity, which sounds pretty expensive relative to other sources of power. But if you compare it to Vogtle, it is way cheaper than that, and this timing is way less than that. So this is something to watch. I don't know that there are a ton of locations in the United States that can be restarted after they've been decommissioned, but definitely an interesting dynamic. The other power item I wanted to mention is in Texas. All of you that have been in Texas know that you've seen really substantial increases in ERCOT power prices over the last few summers. According to our friends at Reunited, in 2021, the July-August average was about $41 a kW, or excuse me, a megawatt. In 22, it was a little over $100 a megawatt. And last year, it clocked in at $161 a megawatt. This is the straight average for July and August. Well, the book is almost closed on July and August this year. Reunited had thought that prices would come down pretty substantially, and they were right. The average so far is only $25 per megawatt hour, a really dramatic increase, which is partially due to weather, but also due to a significant amount of new low-cost renewable resources on the grid. So something to bear in mind as we think about how power is evolving. Again, that's all courtesy of Reunited. If you don't know them, they are an energy transition analytics firm. You should check them out. So Maynard, back to you. Let's talk about Argentina.
Okay, awesome. Well, Bill, you got a quick snapshot of our world, a little markets, little NVIDIA, little Argentina, little power. We got the whole casserole going in energy today. But Bill, it is really so fun to have you.
Thank you.
I've known you for so long and enjoyed watching your work and enjoyed being on projects with you. And I don't remember, you'll have to tell us when you first got involved with the Vaca Muerta, but I feel like from the first time I met you, you were making multiple plane trips to Argentina.
Yes.
And so let me stop and get you to tell the story a little bit.
So I got involved in the Vaca Muerta in May of 2012. It's when Miguel Galuccio was the chairman and CEO of YPF, called me. That's a whole long story. I was in Kuala Lumpur. So we set up a time. He called me and said, we've got a new play in Argentina, unconventional. I understand you know a lot about conventionals. How fast can you get here? And I remember I went through Houston and changed bags and went straight down there. So May of 2012 when we started, and we have been on a full-time contract with various companies, YPF. Now Miguel Gluccio has started an independent company called Vista. They have more of a North American model that we're developing the Vaca Muerta, and so I'm still with Miguel's group along with other clients working on Vaca Muerta reservoirs. So been down there a while.
So Mike mentioned this first YPF discovery in 2010.
Yes.
And by 12, they've called you. Can you give us kind of the headlines? Because then, of course, we all hit 14, and then Argentina started they had their own political issues. But kind of, can you take us through from 12 to today in terms of some key moments in
Yeah, we'll show you some slides. You know, the Vaca Muerta, it's interesting that you use the Eagle Ford as an analog. I would say the analog, there is no analog to the Vaca Muerta. It is a standalone play. But area-wise, about 7 million acres, 30,000 square kilometers is about what the Eagle Ford is. That's about what the Vaca Muerta is, to put it in relation. It's interesting that the Vaca Muerta also has all phases, has black oil, has volatile oil, retrograde condensate, and dry gas. So it has all phases like the Eagle Ford. So I guess if you take area and hydrocarbon composition, it's probably an Eagle Ford analog, and that's about it. The rest of it, it's really an unbelievable play. And it's interesting that I was thinking about it earlier about the Eagle Ford analog, and I went back and looked at the Eagle Ford, and I should have remembered it, but I didn't. You know, we've drilled 24,000 wells in the Eagle Ford. I think our peak rate, we used to have 220 rigs running. Our peak rate was like 1.5 million barrels a day, and then now it's down to about 1 million barrels a day. And I really just look at oil. You know, the Vaca Muerta, we're at a little over 400,000 barrels a day with 30 rigs running. And it should be, when I show you the graphs, you know, it should be a 5x plus over the Eagle Ford. And so the fact that we're at 400,000 barrels a day and the gas that we're at has nothing to do with reservoir quality. It's all economics, right? How many rigs you put on it. And so I've always said the Vaca Muerta ought to be at 5 million barrels a day. If this play was sitting in North America and we put 200 rigs on it, it would be 5-6 million barrels a day. It's quite capable of that. It's just at 400,000 barrels a day because there's 33 rigs running. Now the cycle time, you know, everything about Vaca Muerta, what's interesting about it is, you know, it was, the country was in somewhat of a decline on the traditional oil and gas assets. They were long, you know, a lot of water floods, low oil production, high lifting costs. But the great thing about that was we're sitting in a basin that had existing oil and gas infrastructure and services. And so the Vaca Muerta sitting right there in the Neuquén Basin, you know, we had the Schlumbergers, we had the Halliburtons, we had the pipelines. And so it was an easy play to get moving. It's not like it was some of the plays I work with internationally where you're having to start from scratch and bring services in. So it was perfect to get started in that aspect. But really from 2012, the thing that you have to understand about the Vaca Muerta, this is not a resource in place issue. It's probably the highest resource in place of any play that we work in the world. It is how do you access that resource with hydraulic fracking? And that's the thing that's been the key to unwrapping the Vaca Muerta. And there were some wells early on that were unsuccessful. This huge 200-meter column of hydrocarbons, you drill a horizontal well, you frack it, and the well results are pretty poor. And so there was a lot of people that came in early and were discouraged. And once we kind of understood what that was, now it is what it is today. Extremely prolific.
Maybe just for our viewers, because we got all kinds of viewers or listeners on the show, Bill. We got people who've drilled wells, and we've got people who never have and never will. So we got the whole audience. The leasing in Argentina, like the land position, What's the land regime there? How does it work? How does the royalty work?
It's a concession basis, and so it's really not. It's not real onerous. If you look at what taxes are, royalties are 12%, taxes are 3%. It's not onerous. The issue, and again, I'm a reservoir engineer.
And is it with the federal government? Sorry.
It's with the state,
with
New
with the state of New Kent.
Yes.
Okay.
And so they're big concessions, and it's like any international concession. In order to get the concession, you agree to a work plan, you negotiate, I'm going to shoot X kilometers of seismic, I'm going to drill X wells, and then that's how you negotiate which block you're going to get. And so most of the blocks are probably taken now. There's a few that aren't. And so everybody kind of has their acreage position, and now it's more into development. So early on it's
mostly committed.
Mostly committed.
Yeah, okay.
But it's expanding. It's interesting that, one of the projects I'm working on in Vista, and we laugh about it every day, not laugh, but we laugh because of how good it is. It's black oil that if this was in the Eagle Ford, we would have said it wouldn't work. It's 27-degree API black oil that wouldn't work. It's our best wells in the Vaca Muerta. And so I think the play is probably expanding in the areas that traditionally in North America, we would have said that won't work. And so it continues to get bigger.
Awesome. Well, I don't mean to be jumping over you. We do have some slides.
Yeah, I don't know.
Hit on a couple of these.
Just interesting, the picture is, this is what the landscape looks like. So if you've worked in Midland, Odessa, it is high desert. It's in the northern portion of Patagonia, in Argentina, and this is what it looks like. Driving from one end of the basin to the next probably takes 8 hours.
How do most people get out to the basin?
You fly from Buenos Aires to New Kent. I've driven a 16-hour drive down 2-lane Howard.
16 hours from Buenos Aires to New Kent.
Down 2-lane roads.
Wow.
With truck traffic, hauling frac sand, and so it's not wise. You fly to New Kent, and then it's an hour, 2-hour drive from New Kent to the field.
Okay. Well, we're going to go at some point, so we got to learn these details.
Absolutely. And so I pulled, this is all public data, and I put this map together just quickly, and we kind of talked about it, the size of it, the lines or the phase. And so again, it's a great thing that you have all phases. And so right now, gas is internal, and so you don't want to go develop a bunch of gas because there's nowhere to sell it, but we have black oil that we can truck, and so you can go develop black oil. You can develop volatile oil. And so, everything, it's a great basin, and then we have the gas. And the interesting thing about the gas and the oil, if you look at the gas, the red line, the Vaca Muerta actually gets thick over in that. And, I was thinking about it the other day, like the Marcellus, if you think about it like a BCF per section, remember the Marcellus is like 100 to 200 BCF per section of gas in place. The Vaca Muerta has areas that are over a TCF of gas in place per section. And so, once the LNG market is established here, which we know they're working on the port there is a tremendous gas resource here. And the oil region is really the same way. It's 150 to over 200 million barrels per section. So there is tremendous resource here.
And so we're looking geographically, that's basically the whole play.
All the little bubbles are where the wells have been drilled.
And
but even where there's no bubbles, you can kind of take that green line and then draw a band, going to the east where all those wells are drilled and follow that up, and that's the play. So about 7 million acres.
And you said it's high desert. What kind of elevation is it? Because you're going towards the Chilean border.
Yeah, what's interesting is if you go to the west side of that map, the Vaca Muerta outcrops, and so you're in the Andes, right?
Yeah.
And so it's early on with YPF, we did outcrop studies, and it's no place in the world you can actually see an open hole log and you can walk it on the surface, and so that was instrumental in getting it started.
And what's the sort of the weather in the basin and the seasonality of all this activity?
It's high desert, and so it's hot in the summer and it's cold in the wintertime.
But is activity go around year-round?
Year-round. So everybody plans for it.
So Midland is a decent analogy for the weather and the terrain?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, not a lot of, hazards. ponds and lakes and houses you got to drill around. It's pretty much open.
How about, and not many people?
No. No. Everybody lives in Neuquén or Añelo, the little town near the Vaca Muerta. And so this is
Now you're going to have to do some interpretation.
Yeah. No, I wanted to try to show like what we're dealing with. And so this is two logs. One's in the north of the Vaca Muerta and the other one's in the east side. And really the track that I want you to look at is the green track on each one of them. On the right side is colored green and there's a little bit of blue. That is like the oil and gas in place. And so I'll show you what it compared to the Eagle Ford. But if you look at this column, the green is all the way up and down. It's 200 meters of just solid oil or gas in place. It's not like the Eagle Ford where you have the lower Eagle Ford. It's really good. And then some places the upper Eagle Ford's gone. Then you have the chalk or the Permian. You have it spread out. This is like 200 meters of just pay. And if you look at my little table, the 100 to 200 meters, the porosity, 8, that's Eagle Ford is 8, all the way to 13, like no play we've ever seen before, where their Permian porosities are, 5. The organic content's high, the permeability is really good, and then this is the key. Look at the pore pressure, 0.88 to 0.92 psi per foot. So, the Permian's 0.45 to 0.5, so we're double the energy. We're a thick column. So this, when everybody talks about Vaca Muerta, this is not a hydrocarbon problem. There is plenty of hydrocarbons. Now it's what I drew off on the right-hand side is where have we landed laterals. And so this goes back to my Eagle Ford. My Eagle Ford, if you look at the very most section, we call it the La Cocina, the kitchen. It's about 30 meters, which is about your Eagle Ford. But then you take that, we land wells there. Right above it, there's another 30 meters. We call it the Organico. Right above that, there's another 30 meters. We call the lower carbonate. Right above that, there's another 60 meters. We call the middle carbonate. So there is 4 established strong landing zones here. And so this goes back to Eagle Ford, 1.5 million barrels a day with 1 landing zone. This thing should be 4 times that, right? We have 4 landing zones.
So for those of you who are listening, can't see the graph, or maybe you can see the graph in your not an oil and gas hand, the thickness of where the oil and gas sits is much thicker than what you usually encounter. The flow, the ease of the flow through the rock is much greater.
We have higher pressure.
And then you have much higher pressure to go with
more
that
of
permeability.
13% porosity. We have way more of it.
So what in your experience, like are there, you've looked at stuff around the world, like what subsurface looks like this?
Nothing.
So it's really an anomaly.
There might be plays in the Middle East that have the porosity, but they might be 15 meters thick, not 100 to 200 meters thick. Nothing has this type of storage capacity.
And do you think, so Mike mentioned it, it's a new government, but generally the government, there's been a lot of debt in the system and a lot of overhang from the government. Does the government realize what they're sitting on in terms of its potential?
Yeah, I mean, you look at what YPF's initiative is. They are selling all of their conventional assets and going to 100% unconventionals. This is how you bring dollars into the country, right? Export oil and export gas is how you're going to bring dollars into the country. And why isn't this sitting at 5 million barrels a day, right?
And as you think about where we might be with this basin, so we're at 400,000 barrels a day. Where might we be 1 year, 2 year, 3 years from now? Like, what do you think is realistic? Because a lot has to happen.
Yeah, we've got to get more rigs. With 33 rigs, if that's all the rigs that we have in the basin, it's not going to, I don't know what those numbers are. There's some reports that we'll be in 1 million barrels exporting, in the next 5 years, but it's going to take more rigs, right?
Does these rigs with this pressure, do you have to have a real high quality, expensive rig?
And they do. H&P is here, Neighbors is here. These are our high. It's amazing. Everybody thinks of, you go to outside of North America, and you're dealing with inferior rigs and inferior fracs and all that. These are 20,000 horsepower frac fleets, state-of-the-art, Schlumberger, Halliburton, Calfrac. We do more things down there that I see and we don't do in North America as far as the completions, bigger completions, different fluids and things like that. So this is state-of-the-art completions and drilling.
And it's obviously all the learnings we had here in the lower 48 in the shales. Now this one shows up and it's kind of relatively untouched compared to the North American shales, and so we got a chance to do it better. Is that fair?
That's what's interesting, Maynard, is the cost of to drill and complete a well is obviously more expensive.
Like what would
they're $15 million plus or minus. And so you can't take the North American mentality of $7 million, let's go drill 20 and figure out what worked, the average, and then that's what we'll go do. You can't do that here. And so what is different about the Vaca Muerta, and especially Vista, especially Miguel Galuccio adopted it, was do some science and try to figure out, I don't want to drill an average well. I want to know why the good wells are good and the bad wells are bad, and I want to go drill all the good wells. And so they did some science. They did core work. They did testing. They did microseismic. They did tracer surveys. They did fiber optic surveys. We did a lot of science to figure out what would create the best well, and then go implement that well. And it's been unbelievable. Actually, it's not like we're drilling an average. Every year, our goal is to beat the well before it.
And what would one of these wells look like? Like a really good one? Like how many barrels a day do you get?
We choke them back because we believe in rate management. But I would say we're anywhere from, they've gotten better. We're probably 2,000 to 3,000 barrels a day, not an IP like a 30-day average. Our bottom hole pressures are over 9,000 PSI. And so, we're on a small choke to get 3,000 barrels a day. And the ultimate recovery on these things are 1.5 million to, we have some 3 million barrel wells.
And the best North American shale wells you can think of today, what do they produce?
Probably the best would be the core of the Eagle Ford and the Delaware. The Delaware have a high pressure. The Eagle Ford, we have high pressure. And there's arguments over what they are. There's some 1 million barrel wells. There's not a lot of them, but there's some 1 million barrel wells. These are pretty consistent. I would say we're beating, on average, the best of the North American by at least 30%. But we're just getting started. I mean, our goal, we're not done with that. We're going to get better and better at it.
And is it your experience, Bill, that this is really not a secret how good this is? The problem is just it's been hard to do business in Argentina? Or do you think it's been, this is kind of known but not really, and you have the problems with Argentina? Like, what is your experience when you talk to technical people? Do they really understand how good this is?
Yeah, everyone understands, I believe, the quality of the reservoir. What you really have to focus on here is you have to understand geomechanics, which the definition of, geomechanics is, how does rock materials and how do you transfer energy? How does a rock fracture? And the great thing about it's a curse and a blessing. The Vaca Muerta, we have high pore pressure, but high pore pressure also can cause adverse effects in geomechanics. How does a fracture propagate? And so that's been the key of going back and looking at all the Vaca Muerta wells that are severely underperforming. It wasn't because the porosity went from 13% to 5%. It's because the geomechanics changed and that we couldn't create fractures to connect all this rock. And so, but now that we understand that, we model it, we study it, we look for those geomechanical characteristics to know where do we land our wells. Literally, when the Vaca Muerta started in 2012 with our first horizontals, we moved landings on 15 meters, and we went from wells that probably going to have an ultimate recovery of 100,000 barrels to wells that have an ultimate recovery of 600 to 800. Now they're 1.5 million, and they're going to 2 million barrels just by changing landings on it. Yeah, so unbelievable reservoir. And I put these together because this goes back to my analog. I put Vaca Muerta bookended either side of Eagle Ford, Webb County, and Eagle Ford, Karnes County. And so, again, if you look at the very bottom of the Eagle Ford, the two wells in the middle, and again, you look at that green track, hydrocarbon fill porosity, how much oil is in place. You can see the Eagle Ford, and then look at the two bookend wells, either in La Cocina. They're about the same thickness, right? About 30 meters thick, 100 feet. You can see the porosity of the Vaca Muerta is higher. There's more green down in the bottom than we have in the Eagle Ford. But again, take that Eagle Ford and just start multiplying it going up the hole in the Vaca Muerta, and you can see that it's not one landing zone, it's not two landing zones, it's three, it's four landing zones.
One thing I was taking away from when you first started as a layman who's never picked the landing zone is that depth is so big, I don't have to sweat it because I'm hitting it's so huge. But you're kind of saying with the pressure, you really do need to make sure you put it in the right place.
Yeah, in the Eagle Ford, we were blessed with good rocks, and we're also blessed. Sometimes having lower pore pressure is easier on the geomechanics. It's easier to have fracture propagation, and so we were able to do that. In the Eagle Ford, we didn't have as many, low-performing wells, but in the Vaca Muerta, you can. So that's the Eagle Ford. The last one I put together was the Permian, just to see how does it compare to the Permian. And so if you look at the Permian, Delaware, Martin County, Reagan County, the Permian has 150, 200 million barrels per section. But look at the depth of it. The Permian is spread out over, 1,000 plus meters. And it's about half the porosity or even less than half the porosity of the Vaca Muerta. So the Vaca Muerta in relationship to the Permian, again, the Delaware's making whatever, 2.5, 3 million barrels a day, and the Midland's making 2.5 million barrels. And look at the Vaca Muerta and say, why isn't that making 2.5 million barrels a day? It's a more compact section, which is good, and we are targeting landing, and so it's every bit, if not better, than what we see in the Permian Basin. So this is not a reservoir problem. It's where you land and understanding how fracture propagate through the rock.
Yeah, Bill, I kind of like to get your idea of what is going on right now in Argentina, just from a political standpoint, just from the standpoint of, it seems to be a lot of the oil majors are there. Some are looking to get out. YPF, obviously, you said it, they're going to looking to go from conventional to just shale production. From your standpoint, just from a political standpoint, a regulatory standpoint, where we were pre-Malay and where we are now, is there some real changes that you can see that are out there, especially in the oil and gas industry and just the state? Because, things, just from a currency standpoint, right, it doesn't look like much has changed. He's got a long haul to go, but what are you seeing underneath? At the ground level, that gives you a lot of hope, or maybe not, no hope.
Yeah, no, I'm there 1 or 2 weeks a month, and I'm no economist. I'm a reservoir engineer, but I do see a lot of things, and I hear a lot of things.
Feel on the ground what people are saying on the ground to me.
It's getting, as far as the energy side of it goes, people are starting to get excited about it. And so you might not see things looking at exchange rate, but there's already things behind the scene. Before, why aren't there more rigs? Why aren't there more frac fleets? Well, you can bring a rig in, you can bring a frac fleet in, but you're not going to bring dollars out, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So why would you do that? Yeah. And so now what you're seeing is you can export your crude. And before, you export your crude, and then when you bring dollars in, they were exchanged at the official exchange rate of 380 or 330 pesos per dollar. And so why would you do that? Now you can actually export crude and bring it in at the official exchange rate, which is close to what the real exchange rate is. So that has been huge. You don't really see that behind the scenes, but the currency controls are much better. The companies can actually go out and get services and pay for it in dollars. And so service companies now will be enticed to bring rigs. You saw Vista got a new frac fleet to come down there, and they got a new frac fleet, because we're going to increase production. and they can get dollars out of the country now.
So what you're talking about right now, is that something that's developed over the last year? Is that more like the last 3 or 4 or 5 months where there's some momentum there? I mean,
it's like the last 3 or 4 or 5 months. This is a new thing. You know, really, the beginning of 24, we started seeing a lot of changes, and then recently we're starting to see a lot of changes.
Interesting.
But it's gotten exciting again. You know, before it was like, but you can see the excitement when you go down there. The restaurants are excited, the workers are excited, and it's fun to see that frac fleets are increasing, and hopefully drilling rigs will increase.
Excellent.
The only other thing I put in there was just, you know, the typical curves that you see in North America, which North America, you know, the Vaca Muerta, if you look at it, we're just getting started. You know, that's 7 million acres. You know, maybe we're 10% developed, probably not even that. And what we're still focusing on is not this development, let's go into manufacturing operation. We're still focusing on, again, we want our wells to get better and better. And so if you look at it by vintage, we're getting better. This year's wells are getting better. And so we're focused on this. We're not focused yet on it's a type well and it's a manufacturing operation. We're actually modeling parent-child effects. We're modeling still, can we change the completion design? So we're not done. And something that you asked me earlier, Maynard, our recovery factor here, you know, you go to the Permian and it's single-digit recovery factors. You know, we're 15% type recovery factors in oil here, and that's from a lot of work. That's one thing about it. We talked about Argentina being, you know, a country that had a lot of oil and gas assets. They also had a lot of smart people. There's institutions down there that are teaching petroleum engineering. There's a lot of good engineers, a lot of good geologists. And so it's not like, you know, they understand reservoir, they understand geology. And so now we're just having to show them how to implement unconventionals, and they're really smart and they're efficient at it. So that part has gotten much better. And then, you know, this is a graph that I put together. It's kind of by block, so I don't single out any one operator. But you look at the cum, and I was looking at it earlier, it's like 12 months. You know, we have this is an average well in these blocks. In 12 months time period, you know, we have some wells that have cumed 300,000 barrels, and we have some wells that have cumed 500,000 barrels in the first year. And they're still curtailed, and they're still making a lot of oil and gas. And so, you know, our focus is to get these things better and better. And then, you know, as this gets better, we need to bring in more rigs, and that's where the government's going to come in with helping us with the economics.
Hey, Bill, I'll jump in real quick and ask a quick one. You know, on the service companies and sort of the industry infrastructure, you know, you just mentioned the government helping in to bring more rigs, more frac crews. What are the people resources? You know, you can bring in, you know, you can bring in equipment, you can build pipelines, but ultimately you need people to run all of it. You need people to service these wells once they're on production. Like, is there, you know, where does Argentina stand from that perspective, and you know, how much momentum do you think there is to build the people resources that we'll need?
Yeah, I mean, if you think about the field crews and all that, there is plenty of people to do this because industries are changing, right? We're going from all these stripper wells, we're going from getting logistics down, from hauling sand. You know, if you think of Argentina, it's almost the same distance from like Wisconsin down to Texas to haul frac sand. Mm-hmm. So we're moving the mines closer to the field. And so there's people that have been driving the trucks hauling that sand. So there's plenty of workforce. Where we've got to get better is the technical workforce. And that's where we're working with the universities I would say the labor force that I work with are young. It's really fun. They're really young engineers, young geologists. And they're sharp. They just don't have the experience of hundreds of thousands of wells, but they're really, really sharp. But that's got to be expanded on, and so that's part of my initiative with Texas A&M is to develop a relationship to go down there and try to get unconventionals deployed in the universities to do just like we do here in North America. So there's people down there. We just got to train them.
Yeah.
What do you encounter, Bill, from either the government or sort of other various agencies of the government, et cetera, are they pro oil and gas development, or what are the attitudes outside of the regulations and the currency and all this stuff? What are the attitudes about having a major oil and gas field in their backyard?
They are pro oil and gas. I don't see a lot of, again, not my expertise, Maynard, but I was in Mendoza one time and I saw an anti-fracking sign in Mendoza. That's the only one I've ever seen. And so they're pro energy. and, you know, the fact is, this is the way that Argentina is going to get dollars, right? Mm-hmm. They're going to export to get dollars.
And in terms of the participants, I mean, Mike was touching on it. If you go back in time, where there are a number of U.S. players, and there's some of those service companies you mentioned. What would you observe about the participants in the basin, the various companies? What would you share there?
You know, it needs to be. North America learned from the independents were the ones that developed the unconventionals, and so that's another reason why the Vaca Muerta has probably been slow to start. Is I don't know what the percentage is, Maynard, but a big chunk of the acreage is YPF. Mm-hmm. Then you have Vista as the second largest producer. They're the independent model, right? And you know, how did Vista go from 0 to 70,000 barrels a day in 3 years? Is the independent model, right? And so I think you're going to start to see that. Tech Patrol, Pan American, they're all trying to look at those models and see, you know, this is what it's going to take, is more of the independent type model. So it's interesting that you called me 6 months ago, and I've had some North American operators that have called me and said, tell me about the Vaca Muerta. So it's interesting that there's been before a year ago, no one would talk to you about the Vaca Muerta, right? But you're starting to see some people that are talking about it.
So what about, this is kind of a financial overlay, the shale model that you're referencing, the smaller independent companies. In the early days, they went really hard. They poured a lot of capital into things. They spent more than they outspent their cash flow. You've referenced a couple of times, here's a basin which is so promising, but also a little bit of complexity and worthy of a lot of study with some expensive wells. What type of independent model do you think we get here financially? Like, will there be yes, it may have the mentality of an independent, but it may manage its finances like a major, or, you know, what do you think about the financial model?
The financial model needs to be, you're going to have to, this can't be a model where we saw in some areas in North America where you just went and drilled wells like your neighbor and you drilled a lot of them and you got your production up. This is going to have to be managed and understand the wells, understand the reservoir, or, you know, we're a good example, Maynard. We're already modeling parent-child effects, even though we haven't even started parent-child. We want to know what it's going to look like, and so we don't want to drill a bunch of wells and then find out, oh wow, we have a parent-child effect. So we want to know it now, and so it's going to take a managed approach, spending capital wisely out of cash flow. I don't think this is one where you would outspend your cash flow and then hope good things are going to happen, right?
What about the spacing of the wells? What would you tell us about that?
Wouldn't it?
You don't
just
know?
like any play, we don't know the answer.
TBD?
We tried 250 meter spacing. We've tried 350 meter spacing. It depends on the area. I would say a rule of thumb is 300 meter spacing, 1,000 feet for right now, but it really depends on the area. But then it's not just horizontally, Maynard, it's vertical. Remember, I got 4 benches developed. So how does it, it's a great problem to have because we have 4 benches developed, but it's also a complex problem. And how do you develop those benches? It's the same questions we're having. If I go in and drill the lower 2 benches now, can I go back and drill the other 2 benches later on? Welcome to the Eagle Ford.
So here you have this example. Now, Vista, Geopark, there's companies there, Latin American companies that are developing YPF, but there are also U.S. companies involved. Do you see, is this part of a broader trend over the next 10, 20 years where North American companies are going to be, and experts like yourself, going out into the world and helping the rest of the world figure out their domestic shale-like resource? Like, is that where we're headed over the next couple of decades?
Yes, there's various, I'm not sure how to answer this. There's various cultures that'll accept that, and there's cultures that won't. And we do have, North America has a lot of knowledge because we've drilled hundreds of thousands of wells. We've learned from our mistakes, right? And so it never fails. I'm involved in probably every unconventional play in the world. And let's face it, no one calls me if they drill a good well. They call me when they drill bad wells. And 9 times out of 10, I could paint the picture for them. We searched North America. We found out what's the latest and greatest completion techniques, frac techniques, drilling techniques. We brought that into the country, and we drilled our first couple of wells, and they're bad. Well, did you understand the rock? Did you understand the geomechanics? No. Well, you need to, because this isn't North America. Things change. And so it's going to take, I would say, North America was blessed with really good rocks and pore pressures that weren't extremely high, so that's favorable to geomechanics. How does a fracture propagate through the rock? When you go internationally, it's a different world, right? I mean, we've got high pore pressures, great rocks. Fracks propagate differently. We have in other areas of the world, we have high pore pressures. Some of them we have really low pore pressures and not so good rocks. And so just taking a North American analog and saying, I can apply it over here, it just has not worked very good. So it's going to take some science and some engineering to figure it out.
A lot of learning.
But there's a lot of learning that we do have.
I was thinking about, sort of maybe how the industry develops, or how Argentina develops, not only from a shale oil standpoint, but just a gas standpoint. I know Brazil and other countries want gas, right? I mean, so give us an idea what the infrastructure looks like on the oil side as well as the gas side, and maybe how, if you're seeing any sort of U.S. midstream companies, other midstream companies looking to do business down there.
Yes, I mean, you see, YPF's talking to someone now, and so we see Argentina taking more of a U.S. mentality where there are midstream companies, where it's not like the national company owns all the midstream. Right. People are going in and putting in midstream projects in to move oil. Now you're starting to hear about midstream projects to move gas, and that's why the gas has not developed, is we need a market for it, right?
Right.
And so we're developing LNG export, the country is. You and I talked about it earlier. We're talking about reversing pipelines to send gas north into Bolivia and then over to Brazil. So there's plenty of places for that gas to go, but we need midstream providers to come in, and I think the oil and gas companies are looking for midstream providers where you can separate that, where an oil and gas company doesn't have to put its own infrastructure in to get rid of their product. So the country is ripe for that, right, to do that, because they have that mentality.
Yeah, I'll jump in one more time. Mike, you were kind of thinking about what I was thinking about gas. I was thinking about Argentina, bringing in LNG cargoes that can get incredibly expensive. And at one point, had capped the domestic price of gas. There was some really kind of misappropriated incentives internally. Is the internal pricing regime evolving, along with kind of the development of some of these natural resources?
Yeah, that's a touchy subject. You got to kind of walk a thin line, right? And so you still see oil. You have to meet domestic demand, and so there's a fixed oil price for the domestic demand that every company has their quota. Gas, the gas players have primarily, for the unconventional, the gas players have been Tech Patrol, Total, Pampa. So that's kind of been your 3 big gas players, and they don't have a lot of, the rigs are seasonal, so they're just drilling enough gas that they can sell it when the demand is there. But what you're starting to see is the hope of, again, we can export. How do you get dollars? Ask anyone in the country. They've got a tremendous resource, and it's like, how do I convert it into dollars, right? And how you convert it into dollars is you put the pesos in the ground to drill wells and export your product and convert it into dollars. And so they all know that model, and that's what they want to do. And so I think you're going to see that develop, and it makes sense that it should, right? But you can't just say, okay, we're going to go to a world market and all of a sudden internal prices are going to be market prices, right? I mean, it is, you've got to take steps and make sure that the people are happy with it, right? And so it's just going to take time. So it's a balance that we can see is getting better right now.
Look, it's a great story and it has so much potential. And when you think about the resource that the world needs over the next 10, back to your comment on the Exxon outlook, but even just the next 10 years. I mean, we've got to add a lot of production, and here's this place that has so much potential. That infrastructure you were mentioning, whether it's gas or oil, gathering and transport, do you think that will be done by, you alluded to this, will it be done by midstream companies, or will it be done by the upstream companies, do you think?
I think it depends on the vistas of the world. I think it's going to be done by midstream companies. Their expertise is unbelievable in drilling and completing wells more efficiently and with better recoveries. They're the second largest producer, but if you look at their well results, they're the best well results out there, and there's a reason for that. They're really good at it, and they focus on that. And so taking midstream, I think it would be more of a North American model. Have someone else that's an expert in doing that.
And the LNG potential of the country, you mentioned I know that's hard to maybe estimate LNG, but the gas production, if you said we might be 5 million barrels a day in oil, what might we be in gas? What's the potential here?
The wells are extremely prolific. They're 20 plus million cubic feet a day type, same as the oil. So they're extremely prolific. And so, why isn't it, Marcellus type production? It should be Haynesville type production. If you put rigs on it and develop it, Maynard. But it's so few gas production wells, producing wells right now. It's hard to it's a huge 300 TCF resource. There's plenty of resource.
What just amazes me, because it feels like the thing that we need is time, right? Time to see the government stay in place, see, Malay get maybe reelected again. So there looks like there's some consistency, and because once you start to see that, then people will want to come in country because it's not, all over the place, number one. Number two, we talked about the oil and gas, but I could see the downstream business, be it chemical, whatever the case may be, because they can export pretty readily. So to me, it feels like there's an opportunity for Argentina right now, probably the best opportunity they've had in the last 30 years. If they get it right, could really set this company up, our country up in the next 15, 20, 30 years. And so it's awesome to think about it, but it's a high hurdle.
Right. No, I agree. No,
but it's great to hear that you're saying that there's optimism on the ground level there, and that's what we don't get to hear.
Yes, no, there's optimism. You see it everywhere. You see it in the restaurants. Everyone you talk to, there's optimism.
Awesome.
Yeah, last one from me, Bill. We've been talking about Argentina. We've been talking about how unique, the geology is here, the reservoir pressure, all those kind of attributes. Are there any other, not to reveal too many of your cards, are there any other interesting spots, that us here in the United States should be kind of, paying a little bit of attention to, over the next few years, somewhere else, other parts of the world?
There's a lot of activity in the Middle East. It's just, I would say they don't have Vaca Muerta reservoir. I'm sure they won't like me saying that, but they do have good reservoir quality. But, it's controlled by national oil companies, and so I don't know how much involved we can get in that. And then the other stuff that we see is just challenging. Not saying it's not going to work, but it's just challenging. A lot of faulting, a lot of things that we're going to have to really focus on. You're not going to understand some of the other places in the world by just analogy, drill a bunch of wells and figure it out. You're going to have to really go in there and put some really smart people on it and try to figure it out. But you know, the other play that we're working on right now that is extremely exciting, and you hear a little bit about it, which is the Austin Chalk down in Webb and Dimmitt County. I mean, we're drilling some prolific wells down there. And you don't read about all of them. You don't see all of them. A lot of them are curtailed and things like that. But that's been kind of a sleeper. And then it's not just one bench of chalk. It's kind of like my Vaca Muerta. It's 2 and 3 benches of chalk wells. And so I think there's still a lot to do there that we see active. But in the rest of the world, I mean, I'm working in Bolivia now, but we're early. It looks like an unbelievable resource. We're just early. We've got to drill some wells and prove it up, but the rocks look right. The geomechanics look right. It looks right on the reservoir side of it. We've just got to go drill some wells and prove it.
Well, Bill, I was thinking as we wrap up, because I love Mike's question or comment, which is if Argentina gets this right and they get all this production and they make a lot of money for the people and for the government, it also would have the effect of lower energy costs. So other energy comes to other industry comes to the country. Like this could be, Argentina may be unrecognizable 10, 15 years from now, if a lot of these things
like it used to be,
stunning.
Right? Like it used to be.
Like it used to be. There's our quote for today. It may be unrecognizable like it used to be. Well, we do like to play 10-year math on this show. I think you've kind of already answered it, but 10 years from now, what do you think is the over-under on Argentina oil production?
It should be 1.5 million, 2 million barrels a day.
Okay.
It should be higher than that, but that's
Should
a
be higher,
realistic.
but that's your number.
That's a realistic number.
Well,
That's a Bill number.
That's a Bill number. Oh, awesome. Well, Bill, you're always so fun, and we just appreciate the friendship and love what you're doing, and we can't wait to go down to Argentina and see all this ourselves.
Perfect. I know they'll have you.
Well, awesome. Well, thanks for coming in.
You're welcome. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everybody.